Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to preview the Week 16 main slate for DFS. Jared, another goofy schedule this week. Bengals Steelers at 4:30 on Saturday, then Bills Chargers that night. 3 games on Monday this time. Raiders Chiefs, Giants Eagles, Ravens 49ers. Of course, the Saints already lost to the Rams this week. That leaves 18 of the 32 NFL teams on the DFS main slate for us. We'll see exactly what that means for the players we're going to pick. But before we get to that, how did week 15 treat you on the DFS main slate?
Yeah, last week was okay for me. Not my best week, not my worst week. Cash games were good because I played Christian McCaffrey and Kyron Williams. I kind of made it a rule in tournaments not to play both of them together just because I knew they'd both be super chalky, and they were. But you needed to play Christian McCaffrey and Kyron Williams to win a tournament last week. A couple of mistakes I'm mad about. I got off James Cook after being all over him in week 14, and I kind of thought I had nailed the big James Cook game. But ended up, last week was the really big James Cook game. I did not have him. And then the other thing, just kind of a reminder of the value of playing guys that get boosted on Sunday morning. So for last week, Jalen Waddle, when we learned Tyreek Hill was not going to play, that obviously boosted Waddle's projection. He climbed in our rankings. He would have climbed in the DFS, the DraftKings value rankings if you looked at those. But he still ended up coming in at just 2% ownership, just because people struggle to react, or a lot of people just aren't at their computers, right? Their lineups are kind of done by Saturday night or whatever. So if Hill had been ruled out on Friday, Waddle would have been, at least 10%, maybe 15%. But the fact that news didn't come until, 11:30 a.m. on Sunday, playing Jalen Waddle was, a key to winning tournaments last week.
And if the hurdle that you couldn't clear on that one was the matchup, then that's just a reminder that if a guy is good enough, he can outperform the matchup. So we want to consider the matchups, but make sure you don't overrate them and just consider a guy out of the pool because he's going up against a tough defense. So we're going to start off with the DraftKings picks. If you're only looking for FanDuel picks, if that's the only place you play, check the timestamps in the show notes to jump to the portion of the show that fits your needs. Quarterback, Jared, the lineup generator, says up top to pay up for Justin Fields, 7,100, leads our DK dollars per point projections this week by a pretty solid margin. The next guy behind him is a pay down option, Trevor Siemian, 4,700 in DK salary. For cash, I'd honestly probably be passing over both of those guys and looking to the 5K crew. What about you for your cash QB?
I'm going to play Justin Fields in cash. Like you said, he is our top value. This is the week you can afford to pay up a quarterback. We have no Christian McCaffrey on the main slate. I'm not playing Tyreek Hill at his price tag coming off ankle injury in a tougher matchup. Not to say you can't go for 30 plus, but I'm definitely not going to play him in cash. So there's salary to spend at quarterback. I feel good about Fields in general and in this matchup in particular. First of all, Fields has 49 carries in his 4 games back from injury, 8.8 designed carries per game over that span. That's 1.6 more than anyone else over that span. And then he gets this matchup at home for Arizona. The Cardinals are 30th in run defense DVOA. So I think elevated upside for Fields as a runner. Arizona's 31st in pass defense DVOA. The Bears have a 23.5 point implied total. That's tied for 4th highest on the main slate. So if the Bears are going to score more than usual, Fields is probably going to have a lot to do with that. I feel good about him at this price. I think it's a pretty fair price for Fields in this matchup.
Yeah, he has a bit of the feel of the guy that you need to have. The guy you might need to have at quarterback this week. That's certainly less so in cash than it is for tournament plays. But it's certainly possible given the matchup and given how he can score points. Tyreek Hill's going to be interesting. The popularity, I think, is down from where it would normally be when we get a fully healthy Tyreek Hill. I mean, that makes him seem attractive to me as a tournament play. I know we're not on wide receivers yet, but he might be a bit more of a target because I think folks are going to be worried about that ankle, and it's going to be somewhere less than 100%. But him sitting out last week's game also had a bit of we know we don't need him, so we'd rather let him sit this week and bring him back for the games that we actually need Tyreek Hill for, don't you think?
Yeah, I got that same vibe too. I'll be curious to see what he does in practice on Friday and then how he's listed on the final injury report. We do currently have Tyreek Hill projected for 13% ownership. Again, at $9,600. I mean, that's not horrible. Again, I think you're right. If he was healthy, he'd probably be, 20+% owned because there is no McCaffrey on the slate. So it's who else are you going to pay up for? It's basically Tyreek Hill and CD Lamb. So I don't know. I'll definitely consider him in tournaments. I'd like to see the price or the ownership progression come down a little bit. And then again, we'll see if he's a full go in practice on Friday, he'll be a lot more comfortable to get into lineups.
And just for a bit more context on that ownership projection, there are 7 other wide receivers projected for more. He's tied with Josh Downs and Amon-Ra St. Brown, 2 other wideouts at 12% to his 13%. So, he doesn't stand out as a very popular play as I think he would if he were fully healthy. Back to quarterback, what do you like for the tournament side on DraftKings?
It is tough for me to get away from Fields in terms as well. Now he's projected for 17% ownership. So you got to be thoughtful with that and kind of build around it and make sure you're getting different enough in your Fields lineups. But I'm definitely going to have a Justin Fields, DJ Moore team. Nick Mullins was someone I was kind of interested in at the price and in this matchup. And, he's coming in at 11% projected ownership. So, and then Justin Jefferson is projected to be pretty popular too. So that, takes some of the allure off that stack. But I'm probably going to play a Joe Flacco team, $5,500. So he comes in as, one of the better values at the position, just 7% projected ownership for Flacco. He has 25.3 and 22.9 DraftKings points in his last 2 games, which is, good enough at this price tag. 133 pass attempts for Flacco over the last 3 weeks. Cleveland continues to run a ton of plays. They've gone pass heavy with Flacco. They've thrown on 67% of their offensive plays over the last 3 weeks. And I think that's going to continue against Houston, who is much tougher against the run than the pass. Houston is 5th in run defense DVOA, 23rd in pass defense DVOA. I think Amari Cooper and David Njoku are pretty clear stacking partners with Joe Flacco, and I think you can definitely use both of those guys on your Flacco teams.
Yeah, I was actually wondering if you were going to mention Joe Flacco as we were talking about Nick Mullins being a little too popular, and I agree. Yep. Nick Mullins would be attractive if it were sneaky, but when it's not sneaky, it kind of takes some of the allure away from playing a stack like that. But from that game, running back Ty Chandler has gone from a player that nobody besides Jared Smola was excited about to this week leading our DK dollars per point. So, Jared, is he a cash building block for you against Detroit this week, or is he a potential DFS landmine in a much more challenging matchup than the one he exploded in last week?
Yeah, I think he's a really interesting fade in tournaments at 25% projected ownership, because this matchup is tough. We saw him, go off against a bad Bengals run defense last week, but Detroit 5th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. They're 4th in run defense DVOA, allowing just 3.5 yards per carry to running backs on the season. So again, that's another reason to, play like a Nick Mullins team, is you are getting some leverage off all the Ty Chandler owners, just kind of hoping the Vikings passing scores come through the air. But I am going to play Chandler in cash. He's the first guy in for, honestly, Ty Chandler is the only running back I feel like really good about in cash this week. This might be a week where I end up playing 4 wide receivers in cash games, because I think there's more bankable value at that position than there is at running back this week. But just a running back at 5,600 who played 81% of his team's snaps last week, got 23 carries and 4 targets. And we're not even projecting that much work for Chandler this week, but I do think, 20 total opportunities is a pretty safe bet. So I think you definitely play that at 5,600 in cash in a game that, even though it's a tough matchup, I think there should be plenty of points on both sides of this one.
Yeah, I think he's a fairly easy cash play. I also think he's a fairly easy tournament fade because Chandler's not a lock for production. His offense is not a lock to be good. And it is a tougher matchup than he faced last week. Not to mention a potentially tougher game situation, a better chance that his team falls behind in this game than against Cincinnati last week. Tournament side at running back, what do you like?
Yeah, I'm really excited to play Bijan Robinson in tournaments this week. I think so. We haven't projected a 11% ownership. I think if you could, Men in Black everyone and zap the memory of last week out of everyone's minds, I think Bijan would be 25% projected ownership at this price tag in this matchup. And remember too, the 4 games prior to last week, Robinson averaged 16.5 carries and 5.0 targets per game. He was 3rd among running backs in expected PPR points per game over that span. So could he get screwed by Arthur Smith again this week? Sure, but I think there's just as good a chance he goes back to 16 carries, 5 targets, somewhere like that type of workload on Sunday. Atlanta is 2.5 point home favorites against the Colts. They have a 23.5 point implied total. That's tied for 4th highest on the main slate. And the Colts are 23rd in run defense DVOA. They're 31st in pass rate over expected against. So teams are going run heavy against the Colts. We know the Falcons want to go run heavy anyway. So I feel good about the rushing volume being there for this team. And then Indianapolis is also 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. I'm definitely taking what I think is a pretty big ownership discount on Bijan this week. I'm going to be playing a lot of him in tournaments.
I like the idea of playing some of him. I think you might be going a little too in on him because that 3-game stretch of 16 plus carries is still an outlier for the season. He's got 4 games all year where he topped 14 carries, 3 straight now where he was under 3.5 per carry. The Falcons O-line is down kind of bad right now. I mean, they're banged up and not awesome to begin with. And there's the coach that's been an issue for Bijan and us all season. So there's upside. I'm not saying I would not play him, but I would be a little bit wary of resting my entire week on him.
The O-line is definitely a good point. I know I kind of got off Bijan late last week because of those injuries, which obviously ended up working out. But Chris Lindstrom, Drake Matthews, and Caleb McGarry were all limited in Thursday's practice. So I think they all at least have a chance to return. That's definitely going to be a injury report update to keep an eye out for on Friday afternoon.
I hope that he works out for you. I will hope less so if I'm facing him in any playoffs, but I'll have to check on my opponents to see how much I care about that angle. Wide receiver, this guy's QB leads our dollars per point at the position, so it shouldn't really be a surprise that DJ Moore at 6,900 also leads our dollars per point for wide receivers on DraftKings. Are you treating DJ Moore like a stud in your cash plans this week?
Yeah, I'm going to play DJ Moore in cash. He's in for me. I'm going to play Garrett Wilson too. I'm going to play Garrett Wilson. Definitely not watch this Jets game. You have a super talented wide receiver who has averaged 9.9 targets per game this season, facing the Commanders, who are one of the worst pass defenses we've seen in at least a few years. They are, dead last in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. The Jets are implied for 20 points in this game, which is not a big number, but this is a team that's been implied for like 14 to 16 points for most of the season. So, the Vegas is giving them benefit of the doubt here and saying they're probably going to score a bit more. So it's probably not going to be pretty for Garrett Wilson, but I think he'll do enough to pay off this price tag in cash.
Yeah, 20 points is not a big number for most NFL teams, but it's a huge number for these Jets. And Trevor Siemian isn't good, but he is at least a professional quarterback who has played games before. I just did my first DFS draft on Drafters this week, just before the show, and I got Garrett Wilson with my last pick in that draft as my flex player. So he might be a little bit underplayed this week because of people being worried about how bad the Jets offense was last week. And I guess maybe slightly underrating both the player and the matchup this week.
Yeah, we haven't projected for just 11% ownership. Not super low, but definitely palatable and definitely someone I will consider in tournaments if that ownership stays there.
Who else are you considering a tournament wide out?
Yeah, I like Calvin Ridley. I think I like this Jags-Bucks game as a potentially sneaky shootout. I know, both quarterbacks are kind of shaky, especially on the Jags side if it is CJ Beathard. But both these pass defenses are just bad. Both these defenses are near the top of the league in pass rate over expected again. So I think we could have more passing volume in this game than you might expect. Kevin Ridley, so he's $6,300. He has 33 targets over his last 3 games, including 25 over his last 2. Only 3 wide receivers have more targets over the last 3 weeks. Only 2 wide receivers have more air yards. Kevin Ridley ranks 3rd among receivers in expected PPR points per game over the last 3 weeks, but he's 53rd in actual PPR points per game. So he's gotten a lot of opportunity, has not turned that into fantasy production. Maybe that continues, with CJ Beathard at quarterback. It wouldn't shock me. But if that usage turns into the, corresponding fantasy points, again, against a bad Bucks pass defense, they're 30th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. I think Ridley has a high ceiling in this game. And
with no Trevor Lawrence, probably a better likelihood that they'll be trailing in this game and need to throw the ball plenty. So yeah, I like the upside. I would be hesitant to overinvest in him, but I certainly like the upside path for Calvin Ridley this week based on all the numbers you were talking about. Tight end, we've got Tyler Conklin at 3,200, Chig Okonkwo at 3,100, leading the way in the DK dollars per point. I'm not sure I could get to either of those guys, Jared. Are you picking one of those for your cash tight end or looking elsewhere?
One question this week is how many Jets do you want to play? Because I think Breece Hall is in play too at his price tag. So you have Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and Tyler Conklin. So how many Jets can you stomach? I'm probably going to pay up for Trey McBride in cash this week, which is very rare. I do usually play one of these, low 3K tight ends like a Tyler Conklin. I think Conklin's okay. I think his floor is decent enough. He has been catching, 3, 4, 5 passes most weeks this season, and it is a good matchup for him. But Trey McBride, last 5 games with Kyler Murray, he's averaging 9 targets per game, 7.6 catches, 85 yards per game. He's second among tight ends in expected PPR points per game over that span. He's first in actual PPR points per game over that span. Hollywood Brown and Greg Dortch are looking iffy for this game. Neither guy has practiced so far this week. And then the Bears are already tougher against wide receivers than tight ends. They're actually just 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Just gave up that big game to David Njoku. So I just feel really good about McBride's volume. He's playing well. He actually leads all tight ends in yards per route. So it's more than I usually pay for tight end and cash, but I think it's doable this week because, again, we're not paying super high for any of these other running backs or wide receivers in cash.
Yeah, no arguments against Trey McBride. On the how many Jets do you want to play question, I would definitely knock Breece Hall out of that. His playing time was way down last week, had been in the 60s, down to 40% last week, 2 targets, 6 carries. Obviously, the offense is bad. That's going to hurt the running back. And I think now that this team is out of it and really has nothing to play for this season, he could be somebody that they just take away some work from because he is still, coming off the ACL tear of last year. Maybe it's like, all right, we're going to ease up on this guy because we want him to be good for the length of his rookie contract.
Yeah, that's my thought on Breece Hall as well. Robert Saleh even said a few weeks ago they wanted to get Dalvin Cook more involved. I think that was more about giving Hall fewer touches than Cook more. And I know they've even been getting Israel Abanikanda involved as well. So yeah, I'm not going to play Hall in cash, and I think he's a good fade in tournaments because I do think he'll probably be higher owned than he should be.
Tourney side at tight end, what do you like?
I like David Njoku kind of as a pivot off McBride. Like I think McBride's the better play, but I think he's also going to come in higher owned. I think Njoku, not as strong a play, but not far off either. $5,300 for David Njoku. Again, I mentioned him. I would definitely use him in Flacco lineups. I think you can use Njoku even without Flacco. Njoku has 27 and 29 DraftKings points in his last 2 games. In his 3 total games with Flacco, he has 28 targets on a 21% target share. He's actually second to Trey McBride in expected PPR points per game over the last 3 weeks. Then he gets the Texans, who are 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends.
Same kind of salary area, since you're talking about a pivot. Evan Engram is very similar. He's looking like he's going to be about half his owned or less, just based on what our projections are right now. And the last time that he played with CJ Beathard for that snippet of a game against Cincinnati, there were a lot of targets going Evan Engram's way. So he could be interesting as well in that vein.
Yeah, I've considered him. I still worry about the ceiling. And I know he went for 32 and a half DraftKings points 2 weeks ago and 23 the week before that. So I guess maybe I shouldn't be worried about the ceiling. But he'd been a guy who up until that point was like, okay, he's going to give you 12 to 18 points, but does he really have the ceiling to win a tournament? Engram to me would be someone I would only use if I'm stacking up that game.
I've gotten myself into trouble with Engram, with Njoku, and I'm sure with other tight ends along the way that just aren't specifically coming to mind by worrying about just that ceiling. And I think that it's a position where if a guy gets 1 touchdown, all of a sudden he's got more ceiling than you thought he did. If you're going into the game thinking, yeah, he could catch 6 balls for 50 yards, but he's never going to find the end zone. If he does that and finds the end zone, all of a sudden he's one of the top scorers.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, that had been the issue with Engram is has he still seen a target inside the 10? I know he scored a few touchdowns, but they've been from distance. So that's kind of been the concern with him. But especially with Christian Kirk out, and I think Zay Jones is going to miss Sunday's game as well, that Engram should get some work in the red zone.
You mentioned that Flex might be a receiver for you even in cash this week. Who are your favorite options there?
There's 3 cheap wideouts I wanted to mention. They're more for tournaments, but I do think this first guy, I think Dontavian Wicks is in play for cash games at $4,300. He's already averaging 3.5 catches and 59 yards per game over the last 6. And a lot of that has been as, Green Bay's 3rd or even 4th wide receiver. I think he should be a top 2 guy this week because Christian Watson and Jaden Reed look like they're going to miss. Neither guy has practiced so far this week. And Wicks, Wicks has been Green Bay's best receiver in terms of yards per route run. He has been their 2nd best receiver in terms of targets per route, ahead of Romeo Doubs in that category. So I just think Wicks is the best bet for fantasy points in this Packers wide receiver core this week, assuming Christian Watson and Jaden Reed miss. So I think he's a nice value at $4,300. 2, again, tournament flyers at $3,700. And Michael Wilson, again, if I'm not playing Trey McBride, I think Wilson is worth considering because you're going to have Marquise Brown and Greg Dortch likely out this week. We'll see how they're listed on the final injury report. Michael Wilson's off the injury report. He was dealing with that neck injury for a while, but he's good to go now. He has a 14.9 yard average depth of target on the season. So they've been using him as the downfield guy. He does have a 26.6 DraftKings point game on his resume already this season, so has shown some upside. It's a tough matchup for Michael Wilson, but again, I like the price tag. And then same price, Jameson Williams, I think I like even better than Michael Wilson as a tournament play. Coming off a career high in route rate last week at 72%, gets this indoor game against the Vikings, shootout potential. Minnesota's secondary is not very good, so Williams is a guy that can obviously make his day on just one play. Williams is a good guy to use if you want to play Ty Chandler in tournaments. So, make it a game stack and then throw in someone that's going to have low ownership like Jameson Williams to sort of, negate the ownership you're taking on with Ty Chandler.
Makes sense to me. Over to defense, slight edge for the Jets. $1 single in our DK dollars per point projections over Tampa Bay, which sits number 2. The Jets cost $500 more in DK salary, though. Are they worth that pay up, Jared?
I would like to get to the Jets in cash. I do think Tampa, then I like Chicago as my second favorite defense, maybe even my favorite defense, at least for tournaments at the projected ownership. Chicago's just been playing well for a while now. They've been strong against the run all season. Their pass defense has come on. And then from a fantasy perspective, the Bears have 14, 14, and 17 DraftKings points in their last 3 games now. They're 4-point home favorites against Arizona, who obviously has a shaky offensive line, these injuries at wide receivers. I would rather get to the Bears than the Bucs. I think, the Bucs are where they are because they're cheap, 2,600. They're playing a backup quarterback likely in CJ Beathard, but it's not a great defense overall. So Jets and Bears are my 2 favorite defenses.
And I think I would probably try to avoid both the Jets and the Bucs at what looks like it's going to be high popularity in tournament lineups because, no defense is a lock for production.
Definitely the Bucs. And we have them projected for the highest ownership, right? Yeah, 14%. I think they're an easy fade in tournaments.
Jared's got more picks and analysis available for you in his weekly cash game and tournament articles for DraftKings on draftsharks.com. So make sure to check those out. We are going to switch over now and look at the top plays for the week 16 FanDuel main slate. And Jared, quarterback, just like on DraftKings, has Justin Fields leading the way in the FanDuel dollars per point projections by a significant margin, $1,700 more in FanDuel salary than number 2, Geno Smith for us. Is it worth it paying up for him?
Yeah, I'm going to be playing Fields in cash. I think Geno would be in play in a lot of other weeks where there were more pay up options we wanted to get to. But, like we said, no Christian McCaffrey on this main slate. I think Tyreek Hill is, to me, too shaky to play in cash. So I think you spend up at quarterback for Justin Fields, for their rushing, 49 carries in 4 games back from injury. Awesome matchup against Arizona, both on the ground and through the air. The Bears have a 23.5 point implied total, which is much higher than they usually are, which, again, I think is factoring in the fact that they're at home in this good matchup. So I feel really good about Fields having at least a good fantasy outing and potentially one that is far and away the best at quarterback on this main slate.
Are you sticking with the popular QB in your turning lineups here, or are you looking elsewhere for a little bit, something to differentiate?
One guy you could consider for low ownership is CJ Beathard. We talked about this Jaguars-Bucs game having some shootout potential, both bad pass defenses, both pretty solid run defenses. So I think you could see both offenses go pass heavier than usual. Beathard, $6,100. He comes in as our 3rd best value at quarterback, projected for just 5% ownership. The other thing too, Beathard can run, I think. It's been a while since we saw him, but he has made 12 career starts and averaged 18 rushing yards per game in those career starts. So again, not massive stuff, but pretty decent added value to him, especially at the price tag.
4.99 40-yard dash back at his combine when he was a rookie. So
that's what I mean.
Maybe it's something 17th percentile for the position. So I wouldn't get too excited about the rushing, but it's an interesting spot and an interesting play. Running back in that same matchup, our boy Rachaad White leads the dollars per point rankings for FanDuel. Fine matchup. Jaguars mid-pack at this point in adjusted fantasy points allowed. 2 running backs. The Bucs are 3-point home favorites here. And Rachaad White, 23 plus touches in 3 straight games, touchdowns in 3 straight, and 6 of his past 7 games. I mean, you're building around White here, right?
Yeah, White's first guy in for tournaments. FanDuel has done, I think, an even better job than DraftKings this season of adjusting prices as we go. But I think they've been slow on Rachaad White. I think he's still too cheap. Like you said, the volume has been awesome. Jacksonville, they were a really strong run defense early on. They are down to just 16th in run defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks. So they've slumped a little bit. And then I think most importantly for Rachaad White, Jacksonville has allowed the most receptions to running backs and the 3rd most receiving yards to running backs. So I think, even on FanDuel, I know it's just half PPR, but that still matters. White can still, give you 4, 5, 6 catches in this game with the receiving yards that go with it. And that's obviously big.
And Jacksonville does have one of the top performing pass rushers in the league, Josh Allen, this year, the other Josh Allen. But it was funny. We were watching, I was watching the Jaguars game last week, and my son goes, "That's not Josh Allen."
Like, no, it is not.
More than one person can be named Josh Allen.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rachaad White, to your point about the salary, he is 6th among running backs on the FanDuel main slate behind Jonathan Taylor, Raheem Mostert, Jahmyr Gibbs, Travis Etienne, and Derrick Henry. It's kind of silly, specifically with Derrick Henry, I think, that Rachaad White is priced less than he is at this point.
Yeah, and then of course he's going to be popular, 19% projected ownership, so he's not sneaky in tournaments. I think you can definitely still use him in tournaments, though.
Who else are you using in tournaments at running back?
Yeah, I won't make you listen to my Bijan Robinson stuff again, but I do think he's a strong play on FanDuel as well at $7,100, 11% projected ownership, and the same price range, and actually the same projected ownership. I like David Montgomery as a tournament play. He's $7,300. You know, it's just Detroit has a 24.75 point implied total. That's second highest on the main slate. I think this game has shootout potential, and Montgomery obviously has the upside to score multiple times in this game, which is huge, especially on FanDuel.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I'm going to have to talk myself into taking a couple of shots at David Montgomery this week, because I think he is going to be lower played in whatever format, because Jahmyr Gibbs scored those 2 touchdowns last week. David Montgomery has multiple touchdown upside, pretty much regardless of the matchup. This is the second highest scoring game of the week according to the Vegas total, so you want to get some pieces in that. And if you're getting pieces of a high scoring game, the lead ball carrier for the team that's favored in that game is generally a pretty solid bet.
For sure.
Wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. Jared, you talk about not having a lot of pay up options this week. Lamb leads our dollars per point at wide receiver. His $9,400 salary on FanDuel is pretty big. Is he too expensive to pay up for here, or is the game situation too good to miss? 50-point over-under is the highest of the week. Just one other game on this main slate's within 5 points. That's that Vikings-Lions game we just talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lamb's definitely in play for cash. I mean, he's our top value at the position, so tough to argue it against. I don't think I'm going to get up to him. I like some of these other guys who can save me $1,500 to $2,000. So I think are similar target bets. That starts with Michael Pittman for me. He's the first guy in. Now we'll have to see if he clears concussion protocol. He was a full go in Thursday's practice. All these guys clearing concussion protocol a lot faster late in the season when these games mean a lot more. So that's I'll leave it at that. But so Pittman full go on Thursday, so it seems to be trending towards playing this weekend. And if he plays, we see these guys come off concussions, they are full go. In his last 8 full healthy games with Gardner Minshew, so you're not including last week, Pittman's averaging 11.5 targets per game on a 31% target share, 8 catches per game, 86 receiving yards per game. He has 14 plus FanDuel points in 6 of those 8 games. So he just seems like a super safe bet for cash games at this price tag.
You think we get any CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill lineups on FanDuel this week, with one at $9,400 and the other at $10,000?
Yeah, I mean, it's doable. You need to go cheap a quarterback. I don't think you could play either of those guys with their quarterback. It would have to be like, a mini. I mean, you could, but I don't think it'd be optimal. But again, there are enough cheap plays, and you're not having McCaffrey on the slate. It's definitely worth messing with, because I don't think it'll be super popular, which makes it a better tournament play.
Yeah, both of those guys will be individually popular, but it's probably going to be tough to fit them into the same lineup, especially on FanDuel. It seems like it tends to be more difficult to find those pay down options to really give you a lot of salary cap space to fit something like that.
For sure. Yep.
Tournament wideout. What do you like?
Yeah, I'm going to the other side of the Colts Falcons game and going back to Drake London, who we were on 2 weeks ago because he was at home. He went off that game for 10 catches, 172 yards. Last week he goes on the road, 2 catches, 24 yards. So I really think there's something to these home road splits. I mean, it's a dome team. I mean, we like playing offenses in domes, especially this time of year. London's now averaging 6 catches and 89 yards per game at home this season. I'm not worried about the quarterback change. Like, I don't think it's an upgrade. I don't think it's a downgrade, to Taylor Heineke. So I'm going to go back to Drake London at home, just 9% projected ownership at 6,200 on FanDuel.
Tell me at least that you're not playing Bijan Robinson and Drake London in the same lineup.
No, London will be, the few times I want to get off Bijan, I will play Drake London instead.
And by the way, if you skipped to the FanDuel picks and do want to hear Jared's full sales job on Bijan Robinson, make sure you check the timestamps, click back up to the DraftKings running back, so you'll hear more about Bijan Robinson for week 16. Tight end, we've got Trey McBride looking like a stud and priced like a stud now. $7K salary on FanDuel, still leads our FanDuel dollars per point. Is he too expensive to play in cash, or is he one reason why you're probably not getting to CeeDee Lamb?
Yeah, but I'm paying up from McBride here. I think, as our value projections would show, he was just the third best value on DraftKings, but he's the best value on FanDuel just because those cheaper tight ends like your, Tyler Conklin's aren't as cheap on FanDuel here as they are on DraftKings. So yeah, McBride in 5 games with Kyler Murray this season, 9 targets per game, 7.6 catches, 85 receiving yards. The Cardinals might be without Marquise Brown and Greg Dortch on Sunday against the Bears. And the Bears, so they're 13th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, 28th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. Obviously just saw them give up that massive game to David Njoku. So I think McBride's an excellent target. But even if you compare him to the wide receivers at his price tag, I think he's like just as strong a play as those other guys in the 7K range.
Agreed. And I could use a really big Kyler Murray game for my FFPC best ball tournament team. Tournament side at tight end here, what do you like on FanDuel?
Yeah, I think Jake Ferguson's interesting. I think, with Trey McBride and David Njoku, I also like David Njoku as a play in tournaments, just kind of as a pivot and that lower ownership off McBride. But Jake Ferguson, Miami has been super tough against wide receivers since getting Jalen Ramsey healthy. We'll see about Xavier Howard's health this week, but they are not very good against tight ends. Miami, I think they're 23rd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end. So just in a game with shootout potential, easily the highest over under on the main slate. We've seen Ferguson have a big red zone role throughout the season. I think, he's a candidate to score, maybe even score twice in this game.
What are you flexing on FanDuel? An extra wide receiver here, or is it running back because we lose the full PPR?
So I wanted to talk about Devin Singletary. I think he is a strong play on FanDuel. Now he's super chalky. So I think he's a good fade in tournaments, just as, kind of a mediocre player in an offense that might struggle with their backup quarterback. But $6,200 for Singletary after, again, dominating the backfield work last week. I think that's going to remain the case again on Sunday with Singletary, playing well, had a Dameon Pierce. So I think Singletary in cash is a good salary saver. Garrett Wilson on FanDuel here projected for just 8% ownership. That's even lower than we have him projected for on DraftKings. He's relatively more expensive on FanDuel, but still just $7,000. So a good price for a super talented wide receiver against the worst pass defense in the NFL, especially in tournaments. I'll take on the risk of Trevor Siemian to get Garrett Wilson at this price tag and at this ownership against Washington.
Yeah, I agree with that. Defense, Seattle leads our dollars per point. It's a sensible option at $3,500, but they also lead the ownership projections. Jared, are you playing Seattle in cash, or you got another option there?
I think in cash, I'll probably end up with either Seattle or Tampa Bay, just the two cheap options. Again, I'm not super worried about ownership. In cash, they can give me, 5-6 points. That's fine. In tournaments, I definitely want to get off those two defenses. They're not great defenses. They're just there because they're cheap and they have decent matchups this week. But I really like the Bears in tournaments, 4,400 on FanDuel, not projected for very high ownership. We have them for 2% ownership right now. That's surprising to me. I think that'll climb as people get more into the slate and realize how good the Bears defense has been in real life and in fantasy. They have 14, 14, and 17 FanDuel points over their last 3 games now at home for Arizona, which, offense certainly has plenty of issues. I think there's big upside to the Bears. I hope they stay low owned because I think they're a really strong play in cash and tournaments.
Yeah, make sure you check those projected ownerships into the weekend because they will change. You can see who is looking like the most popular. I agree that Seattle is an easy fade from tournament lineups as apparently the most popular defense this week. It's not a good defense, first of all, so that's one reason to bet against one. And the Titans have a decent 19.25 implied points this week. I think they might be a bit overrated as a matchup. Ryan Tannehill's not a downgrade. He might actually be an upgrade in terms of play efficiency versus Will Levis. Higher graded passer by PFF on the season, slightly shorter ADOT, which probably means some safer throws as opposed to chucking it downfield, and a lower turnover worthy throw rate. Plus they still have, some guys who can play, Derrick Henry, DeAndre Hopkins, Tyjae Spears. So there is some offensive upside there. You can get more FanDuel recommendations and analysis from our buddy Kevin English at draftsharks.com. He's got articles covering cash games and tournament play for FanDuel this and every week. And of course, the lineup generator that we've referred to many times throughout this show is waiting to help you build your own lineups for cash and tournament play on FanDuel, on DraftKings, and even on Yahoo. Our goal with all of it is to help you win Week 16.